Yeah, and there's always the subsidiary services that are required in order to create any particular trading event that we're completely oblivious to. We don't even know how many different millions of individuals have been involved in the preparation or transportation of the materials that suddenly became the objects of our interaction. You know, the sandwich.
Yeah, this actually gets to an important point raised by Adam Smith and more recently elaborated on by Vernon Smith, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics a few years ago. Smith points out that if we want people to cooperate with us, if we want people to do things for us, we're better off if we appeal to their self-love. And one of what I think is the most magical and interesting implications of economics is that you don't have to care about someone in order to care for them. Vernon Smith points out markets economize on the need for virtue. They don't eliminate it, but just merely the fact of drinking a cup of coffee means that you're helping to set the table for someone on the other side of the world who grew that coffee that you may not know.
Well, so Aaron,
that's a really interesting point.
You.
All right, so I'm going to hold on. I'm going to get my I Love Mark shirt on real quick, and I'm going to ask you a question from the uninformed, the anti-free market opposition. Capitalism is just the manager exploiting the working classes for cheap labor. This is not just. So how can you say that trade makes us better off when, you know, a person working for subsistence labor is working for, you know, the evil capitalist and he's just being exploited? How would you respond to that?
Well, the most obvious thing is to point out that it's not true. Even if you wanted to take a purely data-driven approach, you know, the evidence suggests the higher value of industrialization accrued to the working class or accrued to low-wage, low-skill workers in the form of higher wages for unskilled labor. I think I too share concern, obviously, for people around the world who are much worse off, obviously, than we are. But the answer to that is to remove barriers to competition. Mm-hmm. Because if someone is truly being exploited, if someone's being exploited by evil capitalists, then the question we have to ask is, well, what's preventing other evil capitalists, other greedy capitalists, from coming in and hiring those workers away at a slightly higher wage? So the entire body of thinking is incoherent, because it posits that there's some exploiter who's very, 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 very greedy and who's able to extract these profits from the working class, but that there's no one else who's so greedy that they would go in and hire those workers at a slightly higher wage in order to enjoy higher profits themselves.
I just wanted to interject on the individual level. You know, I asked the question, you know, could it be that the person, the individual earning the low wage, that they actually prefer that low wage to any other activity that they could be doing with the time that they spend earning that wage?
Right. Yeah, and that's an important point, especially when we talk about things like sweatshops, or when we talk about things like just anything related to international trade and related to the poor. My friend David Henderson has said before that you don't do people any service, or you don't do them any favors by taking away from them the choice that they actually make. So in the case of unskilled workers, doing everything that we can, I think, to expand their range of options, either through open immigration, I think, or open free or complete free trade. These, I think, are the solutions to global poverty. Telling people, no, you're not allowed to make this decision because I think it's icky, is, while not technically economics, I think is not the sort of values that we want to inculcate in our students and children and friends.
So I'm going to move on to the sixth principle of economics that you mentioned, which are that people are rational, and people will tend to do things that will make them better off. And Aaron, I'm going to hand this over to you so you can extend that into the question.
All right. So, you know, the point I wanted to bring up is, you know, what does the fact that people are rational, what does this mean in terms of action? Do you have to agree with what someone does, or is it simply their choice? Do people just make mistakes, and they may not be rational, but they're acting in their own self-interest, and they might err. Could you just expand on the fact that people tend to do things that will make them better off, but they're not omniscient. They don't know everything.
Right. Yeah, there are a lot of different ways to think about this. I think the way that I think of rationality in economics, I think of it as just purely a definition. People make decisions in the face of costs and benefits, and they try to do things that they think will make them better off. It's not always clear that their cognitive functioning is perfectly consistent with that. But over time, presumably the market will reveal these errors, or will reveal errors that people commit, and also reveal ways for them to try to correct those errors.
So they don't have to be correct in their
in
their decision. They can actually be wrong. They can believe
absolutely.
that the world is flat, but to them that feels like a very rational decision.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. When I say that people are rational, and one of the reasons why I say I think this is a lot more controversial than it needs to be, is I'm just saying that people make choices, whatever those choices happen to be, consistent with what they believe to be their goals, or consistent with their goals, whatever those goals happen to be, and consistent with whatever mental models people have of the world that says this is an appropriate action, or this is an appropriate action that will help me to achieve these ends. It by no means means that people won't make mistakes.
So I wanted to ask you. So did someone, let's say, who invested all their life savings on 32 black in a game of roulette, did they do something irrational, or did they just do something maybe subjectively stupid?
Ill-advised.
Yeah, ill-advised.
Yeah.
And so I mean that person maybe it was stupid, but it doesn't mean it was irrational. That person obviously had an objective. They thought that roulette was a means to their ends of the satisfaction that they would have attained by having that money.
Yeah. I would say there's a difference between people doing something foolish and people doing something that is irrational. And again, and I think this is where we tread a very fine line, because when I talk to my colleagues in the psychology department, when I talk about people being rational in economics, I think I mean something very different from what they mean by people being rational in psychology. I just mean that people act in accordance with whatever their chosen ends happen to be. And I think my colleagues in psychology tend to, and I could be over-speaking here, but I think they tend to think of a rational person being someone who has a correct model of how the world works.
I think that's a very important point. We should maybe talk about that a little bit more at another time, and maybe bring a psychologist in on that conversation, on that element. That's very interesting. I want to move on to the seventh principle here of using markets is costly, but using government can be costlier still. And so I think we've come up with a way to frame this argument that is beneficial for all parties involved. And that is, when someone enters into a government job, do they cease to be human? That is, say, when someone gets a government job, do they cease to be looking out for their own self-interest? So, you can actually answer this yes or no.
Yeah, I think it's manifestly obvious that people are still looking out for their self-interests when they enter a government job. It's, I think, unfortunately naive of social scientists to put the burden of proof on the market and say, okay, well, why should we allow people to engage in these voluntary transactions? Well, show me that they shouldn't be allowed, or show me that we should allow you to force other people to act in accordance with your values, or something to that effect.
And if the debate could be framed that way, I think that would be very helpful, because that's true. It seems to be that the market is always on the defensive.
Right. Yeah, I was saying to a friend, especially when you look at the things that governments have done, the governments did in the 20th century. It honestly, it's a bit of a puzzle to me as to why libertarians don't have the moral high ground.
So a couple of things that people in government propose to help out the economy, whether their mind is in the right place or not, but to help us out to correct so-called market failures are things like price controls, subsidies, taxes, and you were saying minimum wage laws. So you're saying these things, price controls, subsidies, minimum wage, you're saying these things make the situation worse.
I'm only going to give you 10 seconds to answer this question, Art.
Yes. That's basically it. And any interference with the price mechanism will almost certainly make things worse.
Yes. All right, so we're going to be coming back in just a few minutes, folks, for our final segment. So please stay with us. This is Radio Free Market. We're talking with Dr. Art Carden and Aaron Brown on the 9 Principles of Economics 101. So stay with us. We'll be right back.